And welcome to the Buffalo Rumblings podcast. My name is Matt Warren. I'm joined today by Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News, who we've just had a fun little 15-minute adventure getting his video and then his audio to work. So anyway, we're live. Jay, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good. I just went through a technology class. I feel pretty good about what we just learned.
Well, that's good. I'm going to double check that people can see you and hear you using our comments section. Can you see and hear? People could hear me but not see me, and so Brian Galliford's face was projected onto their screen the entire time, and his cats kind of took over our podcast here for a little bit. So it was a different kind of hangout.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, why don't you start by just kind of telling us how long you've been covering the Bills for the Buffalo News, and I don't know, kind of a little bit of your backstory, real quick.
Sure. I went to St. Francis High School, just down the street actually from Ralph Wilson Stadium. Grew up in Lewiston, so I'm a native Western New Yorker. College-wise, I actually went to the University of South Florida. Came back home, started my career at the Niagara Gazette, a smaller newspaper up in Niagara Falls. Got into sports. I worked on the news side for about a year, got into sports, and actually started covering the Bills up there for the Niagara Gazette. Then came over to the Buffalo News a little more than 5 years ago now, and have been covering the Bills for about 4 of those years, pretty much exclusively, though, as that being my main beat for the last 3 seasons now, I guess it would be. I kind of dabbled in the coverage. I did some blogging and things like that on game days to start, and then I've kind of moved into it being my exclusive beat during the season for at least the last 2 years and really the last 3.
Well, great. And so you've been in the last 5 years, we've seen some pretty big news out of the Bills, of course, between coaching changes and things like that. What have you seen from Doug Marrone in, say, the last few? Okay, they can't see you, but they can hear you, so that's at least something. Okay. Yeah, so now they're going to see me the entire time, which is going to be even awesomer. I can see Jay, and he is sporting a classic beard right now that I could never pull off, and a lovely green polo shirt, guys. I know that you were wondering because you like to make fun of what I wear.
I'm disappointed because this is a heck of a beard I got going right now.
It is a heck of a beard. There was a Twitter post, I can't remember if it was from you or your wife, with some sunglasses and your little baby, and you're rocking the beard pretty hard in that one too. But
yeah,
what's going on.
She's anxious for the beard to go away. So eventually it will be it'll be on its way out here pretty soon.
Yeah, well, I can't grow any facial hair, but when I go, like, say, 6 days without shaving and it starts to come up, my wife doesn't like it either. Yeah. I don't know how you transition that, so I'm just going to just let it hang out there for a little bit. Let's get into Bills OTAs and minicamp. And the biggest story that has come out of minicamp and OTAs and really this entire offseason is kind of this whole thing going on with Marcel Dareus. First, it was his off-season arrest, but that was before minicamp. And then during OTAs, getting arrested for that street drag racing incident. What's kind of the general consensus from his teammates, from his coaches, about Dareus moving forward? Are they supporting him, or are they kind of just like, the dude's got to grow up and we're going to treat him with tough love, no more kitty gloves?
I think it might be a little bit of a mix of both of those. I think, if you listen to Kyle Williams, probably as respected of a veteran as there is in that locker room, they understand that, the mistakes that he's making maybe aren't the kind that you can't come back from or that you can't get a second chance from, but at the same time, he needs to stop making them. I mean, it's just been a series of bad decisions upon a series of bad decisions, and maybe none of them are real. Taken as a whole, it looks maybe worse than individually what each of them are. They recognize what an enormous talent he is. Kyle Williams said that one day he could go on the Wall of Fame, and I don't think that Kyle Williams says things just to say them or didn't mean it when he said that. So I think that really gives you an idea of just how talented they think he is. And Doug Marrone knows it too. And they're just looking for some answers as to what to do with him. And these problems didn't crop up in the off season. If you go back to the end of last year, the chronic lateness that he was fined and suspended for, I mean, if it got to that point, I mean, how many times had he been warned about it before? I mean, it had to have been numerous. So obviously they're working through a number of issues with him. And the contract, the way it's set up with Marcel Dareus is they don't really have a lot of pressure right now. I mean, they can let this play out and see if he is able to correct, take the necessary steps in his life to make the positive changes that he needs to make. And if he can do that, then it's going to work out great for them. But if he can't, they're able to get out of that contract that they have with him. The extension that they picked up earlier this offseason really doesn't mean a lot until the beginning of next league year. So they've got a year here to figure out if they can get him the help that he needs. And I think they're committed to it. They need to be committed to it. He is that talented. So now I think a lot of it rests on him now.
Yeah, that contract, like you said, is non-guaranteed, and so they can part ways with him pretty much any time between now and a year from now, even the start of the next regular season, without owing him any more money than they're already on the hook for.
Right.
Has anything come around with Jerry Hughes? He allegedly was driving. Well, actually, no. He admitted he was driving the second car, but said they weren't street racing. Has anything kind of been bubbling underneath the surface, or anything we need to know about with Jerry Hughes, who is another guy that's going to play a pretty important role on this defense in 2014?
Yeah, I think that the Bills' take on it, and it's understandable, was that they're going to let the legal situation play out. And as of now, Jerry Hughes hasn't been charged for whatever reason that may be. If there's not evidence to suggest that they were drag racing, I think it basically becomes a non-issue. If he's not charged by the police, then the Bills are certainly in no position, I don't think, to punish him any further or punish him at all. I think in the eyes of the Bills and in the eyes of the league, if the police don't have an issue with what happened that day with Jerry Hughes and Marcel Dareus, then the Bills aren't going to have one either. So I think for Jerry Hughes, this can just be a blip on the radar, and I think what he would like for it most of all is to just kind of go away quietly, and I think it looks like it's going to for him.
Yeah, that would certainly be nice. One of the things that I think hurts Dareus a lot in this situation, not only is the fact that it was his second arrest this offseason, but fleeing the scene of an accident, especially with people saw your car. I don't know what was left behind at the scene or anything like that, but fleeing the scene of an accident, he was caught up with, I should say, about half an hour after the incident occurred. I mean, it's not like it took him a long time to find him, and fleeing the scene of an accident certainly doesn't bode well for his, character concerns going in front of a judge.
No, I mean, and it looks like he's trying to cover something up. He knew he was doing something wrong, and he was trying to cover it up. And yeah, you're right. It doesn't look good. I mean, it's a series of bad decisions. It started with drag racing down Mile Strip Avenue, or Mile Strip Road
in the middle of the afternoon.
In the middle of the afternoon, and I know a lot of people will say, well, nobody got hurt, but I think at some point you do have to say, but boy, somebody really could have. I mean, that is just not a safe thing to be doing at that time of day, and it just, I think it speaks largely to his decision-making process, and why would he think that was a good idea? And then he compounds problems by showing up late, for the penultimate game of the regular season and getting suspended, and then literally showing up late the next day. Mm-hmm. I mean, that just shows a pattern of not good decision making, and it continued, here a month ago.
Yeah, and if there's a lot of speculation, what would have happened if that tree wasn't there? There was apparently I don't know, I haven't been down there, but an open parking lot and maybe some shops or things like that. I mean, his back tire came off, if I'm not mistaken, so he really could have ended up in a lot of different places where a lot of people were had that tree not been there. But I don't know. Let's move on to something a little bit more fun. We're talking with Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News. If you're watching live or on YouTube following our show, you probably can't see him, but as we have said before, he's rocking a beard that I'm jealous of because I cannot grow a beard. I've got the facial hair of like a 14-year-old boy. Anyway, moving on to other kind of hot topics from minicamp and training camp. Pretty much every national outlet is saying that EJ Manuel is going to make or break the Bills season. I don't find any reason to disagree with them. How has he looked in these off-season practices?
I mean, I think I would say so-so. It would be the best way to put it. You know, he's made some good throws, and he's been inaccurate at times, quite frankly. You know, I think it's important to remember, though, with the offense, and EJ Manuel has said it, Nate Hackett has said it, and Doug Marrone has said it, is that they've thrown a lot at him this offseason. Really, the entirety of the playbook they've given him, and that's in an effort to get him comfortable. And I think that's a good use of spring practices. Now, I think, you know, with this month off here before camp starts, maybe they take a look at, you know, what they were able to do in the spring, what he did well at, what he liked, what he didn't like, what didn't look good. And I think maybe they start to pare down the playbook. And then when they get to training camp, they sort of work on those plays that they executed well in spring practice. So while it's easy to kind of get caught up in the, oh boy, you missed that throw, or, you know, that play backfired, that didn't look like a good one. Well, you know, there's a good chance that, you know, come September that play is not going to be in the playbook either. So I think it's okay to, you know, give him a little bit of a longer leash. And I mean, come on, it's May, you know, and it's May practices, June practices. It's not time to really, really worry. You know, that being said, I think there are certainly times where you would like him to make a better throw, even if it is only a June minicamp practice. So I think with 5 preseason games and extra time at camp, that's pretty important for EJ Manuel right now. You know, it's easy to forget that I don't think anybody's forgotten it. He didn't play a lot last year. You know, he only had 10 games. So he needs experience, and he needs reps, and he needs all of that. And the Bills they're the earliest team in the NFL to report to camp. They've got 5 preseason games. So there's going to be a lot of time for EJ Manuel and this offense to try and get on the same page, more so than what they were in spring practices, because, you know, quite frankly, they weren't always on the same page during the spring.
Right. One of our readers, J2, asks, well, I'll put this first part in. We'll get to Sammy Watkins here in a second, but there's been a lot of talk from Joe Buscaglia at WGR that Sammy Watkins is the first guy in the facility every day. He's putting in a ton of extra hours and things like that, at least during OTAs and minicamp and things like that. And J2 asks, perception is that EJ is around the facilities a ton. Is that correct from what you can tell? Yeah.
I mean, I think that he said during the minicamp that he reports at, I want to say 6 a.m. and is there until 8 p.m. I think the first meeting for the team doesn't start until 8 a.m.
This is EJ you're talking about?
This is EJ, yeah. Okay. So he's there.
Just clarifying.
Yeah, a full 2 hours. Is that who you were asking about, EJ?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, you know, he's there a full 2 hours before they have any meetings, and you know, as I said, staying until 8 p.m. So I don't think there's any issue with him putting in the hours at all.
Haven't really heard a lot about Thad Lewis in off-season stuff. Is there anything different than last year with Thad Lewis, other than the fact that he's there for off-season workouts and not being on the Detroit Lions roster?
No.
Okay.
Short answer is no. There isn't anything different. I think he's got a pretty firm grasp on the number 2 job going into into training camp. I will say that you could strike up the rumor mill now, but I thought that Jeff Toole actually looked pretty good in the spring. He was noticeably bigger. I thought he had a little bit more zip on the ball. I'm not saying right now that immediately Jeff Toole is going to push Thad Lewis for the number 2 job, but I am saying that I thought he looked pretty good, and I thought he looked good in training camp last year. That's how he earned a job coming out of camp to begin with. So it's possible that Jeff Toole is one of those guys who just practices really well. But that being said, I don't think anything's changed with Thad Lewis. I think they're comfortable with him as a backup. Doug Whaley said it, many times that he wants his backup to get them to 500. Lewis was 2-3 last year. So really their actions speak a lot louder than their words. They haven't brought in anybody to seriously challenge him.
Right. Yeah. Chris Brown actually at BuffaloBills.com has been talking up Jeff Toole for at least a week now, probably closer to 2, saying about the same things you were saying. He looks bigger. He looks more confident and all that other stuff. But let's focus on that big rookie acquisition that they brought in to get EJ Manuel hopefully over the hump, Sammy Watkins. how has he looked in practices, especially compared to the other receivers? Is he going to be able to step in and make a big contribution right away?
Yeah. I mean, he's going to be given every opportunity to, and they're going to move him around in the offense. They're going to play him outside. They're going to play him in the slot. I think they know that they've got a dynamic weapon in Sammy Watkins. Now, that being said, I don't think that I wouldn't say that he was far and away the best player on the field in spring practices or anything like that, and that's okay. There is a big learning curve to playing wide receiver, and there was a difference, from rookie minicamp when it was clear that he was absolutely the best player on the field, and it was by a lot, to when the other guys got into camp, and he's going up against veteran cornerbacks. I thought, I don't want to say that he looked bad or anything like that, but I think he's got a lot to learn, and I think they're working through a pretty big playbook with him. I think it's safe to say that the playbook and the route running is much more advanced than what it was at Clemson for him. So there's work to be done there with Sammy Watkins, and I think it's important for people to try and keep that in perspective, is that yes, he was the 4th overall pick, and they paid a dear price to get him, but he is still a rookie, and there are going to be times, be it in training camp or maybe even in the regular season, probably in the regular season, where teams are going to game plan against him and effectively limit his opportunities, and he's going to struggle at times. That's to be expected, and I think, given, like I said earlier there, the price that they paid, I think the expectations on him are going to be very, very high among fans, and it's important that they don't become unfairly high. There are other receivers on this roster who have done it in this league. Mike Williams and Robert Woods, and even Marquise Goodwin to a lesser extent, T.J. Graham, that have played in this league that, and in this system last year, not Mike Williams excluded, of course, but who might be, at the start of camp, understanding a little bit more about what's going on in this offense, and that comes with the learning curve for Watkins.
We're talking with Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News. You can't see him, but you can hear him. And if you're listening on our podcast, it won't matter to you. Okay, so you just talked about some of the other wide receivers. With Stevie Johnson gone, some folks have kind of been, I won't say settling into positions because they've been rotating guys through a ton. But Mike Williams in particular has been getting some publicity for kind of not standing out during OTAs. Do you put any real stock in what's going on at the wide receiver position right now in May and June?
No, I don't, because it's, wide receiver is a position that, and if you look at the college game and this draft last year, they're wide receivers grow on trees. There's just so many of them, and it's not unusual for a team to have a lot of guys in camp who can all play. I mean, these guys are good. They're all good, and they're going to look good when they know they're not going to get hit over the middle, for example. That's not going to happen. I would have been a little bit more worried about Mike Williams if, at the end of minicamp we didn't talk to him and he said he was only 70% from off-season surgery to repair what I believe was a torn hamstring or groin. I'm mixing one of them up, but he's not fully recovered yet. And with another month or 5 weeks off here to get fully healthy before training camp, I think if he's able to do that, I think you're going to see a much different Mike Williams. And I think it's much too early to say that Mike Williams is, whatever you want to call it, on the roster bubble or in jeopardy or anything like that. I mean, this team does not have a lot of proven outside receivers, and Mike Williams, in the first 4 years of his career, especially the first 3 when he was healthy, put up some pretty darn good numbers in Tampa, and I think he brings an element to this offense that this team needs, and I think he's going to be given every opportunity to show that he can do that, and really every opportunity will come in those 5 preseason games in camp. It wouldn't come in 12 spring practices.
All right, answer with one name. Who's the best receiver at spring practices, OTAs, and minicamp?
Robert Woods, easily.
I like that you said that because you hadn't mentioned him at all, the rest of it. So that's interesting.
He's
been consistent. We've been hearing his name a lot, which is good. I mean, that's why they drafted him in the second round. He had the talent. He was polished. Now he's just ready to take the next step, I would hope.
I think that it would not surprise me in the least if he was the Bills' leading receiver this year. I think he seems to be really on the same page as EJ Manuel. I'm very, very impressed with the way that he goes about his work. He was coming off surgery too on an ankle, so he was a little bit limited in the spring. But when he was out there, I thought he was by far and away the best receiver on the field. I think he's going to really thrive in that slot receiver role. And as I said, I would not be surprised at all, even with Sammy Watkins on the roster, if Robert Woods was this team's leading receiver at the end of the year.
Yeah, he does have, like you said, have that really good connection with EJ Manuel. And he was obviously hurt last year when Thad Lewis came in, because I don't think they had kind of the same chemistry that he and EJ Manuel did. Moving to the offensive line, the left side of the line is pretty well set as long as everyone's healthy. It's going to be Cordy Glenn at left tackle, Chris Williams at left guard, and then Eric Wood in the center. But the right side of the line has been seeing a lot of kind of moving pieces. Do you think Craig Urbick is going to stay at the right guard, or is it going to go to someone else? I'll just leave it open-ended.
Yeah, I think Urbick will hold off the challenges that he's going to get, whether it be from Hairston or Asper or J.J. Younga, whoever the Bills decide that they want to try to challenge him. I think this Hairston thing is just sort of an experiment, really. I didn't put a heck of a lot into it. He doesn't look to me like he's in very good shape, which is understandable because he hasn't played football in quite a long time. Now, I don't know how much better shape he's going to get in 5 weeks, though. I mean, maybe he'll come to camp and he'll have been slimmed down and really look like the player that the Bills sort of were hoping that they had before he went on injured reserve last year. But I think that, yes, I do think Urbick will be able to sort of hang on to that job. And then, the interesting question is at right tackle, what will happen? Can Cyrus Kwanjo unseat Eric Pierce? That remains to be seen. If they're serious about this move with Hairston inside to guard, it really brings into question for me the swing tackle job, which is a pretty important job on the offense. If this offense really is going to look a lot different if Cordy Glenn were to get hurt, or a right tackle were to get hurt, whether it's Pierce or Kwanjo. So that's an important job. So I think that's something to really keep an eye on in training camp. What are they going to do with Pierce? They drafted Kwanjo obviously because they want him to start at right tackle as soon as possible. Pierce makes a pretty good salary. If they wanted cap space, he would be a guy that you would look at, but I don't know I don't think they have a better player on the team than Eric Pierce in terms of a backup tackle. So that'll be interesting to see what they do there. I would not, if I were the Bills, I wouldn't cut him. I mean, he would be pretty good veteran depth, and I think for far too long the Bills have sort of done moves like that where they have gone with younger guys as opposed to keeping a veteran like Pierce. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out when camp gets here.
Remember the big Eric Pierce, Chris Hairston battle that we were supposed to see in training camp last year when Hairston was making laps around the field at St. John Fisher? Maybe we're going to see that this year at St. John Fisher, but for that backup spot. I noticed that you didn't mention Cyril Richardson's name as part of the right guard competition. Was that on purpose, or was that just an oversight?
No, I think it was on purpose. I don't think he's at that point on the depth chart yet that he would be seriously pushing Craig Urbick. I think that.
But you mentioned, I think, 3 other guys in front of him. Do you think that those guys are going to make the roster ahead of the 5th-round pick Cyril Richardson?
No, not necessarily either. I just think that Richardson's got some learning to do, and he's also another guy that I think that they probably want to get into a little bit better shape. He looked a little heavy to me at camp. That being said, I know Marone likes big offensive linemen, and Richardson is that. So I just don't think that he's necessarily ready to step right in. But it's important to remember that he was a 5th-round draft pick, so he's going to have. They'll say up and down that won't matter when it comes to making the roster, but I don't really believe that all the time. I think that they're going to tend to keep their draft picks. If it came down to keeping J.J. Younga and Cyril Richardson, if they were dead even, I think they'd keep Richardson because they drafted him.
Okay. Offense, we're not going to talk about running backs just because. Let me just ask you one question about running back and we'll move on. Does C.J. Spiller look healthy?
Yeah, I think he was. I mean, it was a high ankle sprain. He's had plenty of time to get right. I think he'll be fine.
Okay, was Bryce Brown really explosive? Was he as advertised?
He was fast. I wouldn't I'm anxious to see more of him. I didn't come away from spring practices saying, wow, they really stole Bryce Brown for a fourth-round draft pick. I talked to Bryce Brown actually on the last day of minicamp, and he mentioned his speed as being his biggest attribute, and that's the type of player, uh, that's what he wants to be known for, and that's how he wants to be effective in this league is using his speed. And that was pretty interesting because that really is C.J. Spiller's role. And obviously the situation at running back is everybody knows it. Fred Jackson and C.J. Spiller are going into the last year of their contracts. So if Bryce Brown is the speed back and C.J. Spiller is the speed back, that's pretty interesting. What happens there a year from now?
Now, it was you that wrote the running back thing for the Buffalo News. Was it today that it came out?
Yeah. It actually ran in Sunday's paper, but
Okay.
yes, recently. Yeah.
See, you guys should go check out his writing at the Buffalo News. He talked about the running backs earlier this weekend, so we're not going to rehash that stuff. You should go read it at buffalonews.com. So who is the offensive MVP of the spring practices?
We talked about him earlier. It was Woods for me. It was easy.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I was just very, very impressed, and I think that this move to the slot is really going to benefit him. He just looked really comfortable there, and normally we talked about it earlier how the Bills have a tendency to sort of get rid of veteran players maybe that could have been useful. But in the case of the trade of Stevie Johnson, I wondered, is that what's wrong with having good depth there? But really, I think that Robert Woods is going to be able to fill that role and fill it effectively. So I was very, very impressed with him in the spring.
Great. I've got one more question about the offense from one of our readers, Singa, and he asked if Dixon can play fullback. I'm not going to go exactly with that question, but when they were lining up in their different formations, what kind of back sets were you seeing? Were you seeing two back sets with, I know we saw a couple plays with Spiller and Fred Jackson in the backfield together, but what about Anthony Dixon at fullback? Are they using some of the other fullbacks on the roster? Are we going to see a single back set, or are they going to use a roster spot on a fullback?
That's a good question. I didn't see a ton of two-back sets in camp. Now, in spring practices, I should say. Now, don't hold me to that though, because I wasn't charting every play or anything like that. But the times that I saw Anthony Dixon running the ball, it was out of a traditional single back set behind EJ Manuel. Could they use him at fullback? I think possibly, but really what I think that you may see is more in short yardage, which is a role that he did pretty well with in San Francisco. And of course, you have to remember too that he was brought in. They mentioned Doug Marrone at the end of the season last year that they need to upgrade special teams, and that's something that Anthony Dixon, I think, was brought here for. So as the fourth running back, because I do think that they'll keep four, that's going to be his role. I mean, that's going to be his primary job is to play special teams and to maybe pick up some short yardage, and then you've got decent depth. We saw both Fred and CJ were banged up last year. They've got Bryce Brown, they've got Anthony Dixon, so I think they feel better about their depth now at running back, as they should.
Yeah, the core special teams thing is certainly going to come into play. Going to come into play with Corey Graham and a bunch of the other free agent acquisitions that they signed. So moving to defense, how's Brandon Spikes? Like, just being around him in general.
He's a different, fun guy, and he's something that the locker room hasn't had a lot of guys like him, and it's pretty interesting. I wonder if it's something about that position, because he reminds me of Takeo Spikes, and that his personality, it's rather outgoing, and the time that I spent around Takeo Spikes, he kind of reminds me of that too. I think it was good. I think this team could use a little bit of moxie or a little bit of attitude, whatever you want to call it, and he's a hungry guy. He signed a prove-it deal here. A one-year contract is it says a lot about where he is in the league. I mean, he's got to prove to the Bills or to the rest of the league that I think he wants to prove that he can be an every down linebacker. I don't know how much of a opportunity he'll get to be that here in Buffalo, but even if it is just on first and second down as a run stuffing linebacker, he's going to have to perform well to get that long-term contract that I'm sure he's after.
again, without the pads on, it's kind of hard to have some of these conversations because Brandon Spikes isn't going to run up there and take on, this huge block during minicamp. So let's talk about some of the stuff we can, I guess, speak to. Did Keith Rivers look fast? I know he's going to be playing on the strong side, but did he look fast enough to be successful in this defense as a four-down linebacker, what Doug Whaley called him when they signed him?
I mean, I have my doubts. I'm not really sure what they're going to get out of Keith Rivers. I mean, he came in, he's bounced around the league. I don't think that a lot should be expected of him. Now, I say that, and I looked at the Manny Lawson signing last year. I think is sort of a good comparison. I thought Manny Lawson actually had a pretty good year. So, if Keith Rivers is a guy that they feel fits the system that Jim Schwartz is going to be putting in, maybe that's exactly what he needs is that system to really excel. And I think Manny Lawson was a good example of that last year. His statistics in Cincinnati and before that in San Francisco didn't really wow anybody, but I thought he came in and filled a role really nicely in Mike Pettine's defense. So I think that's got to be the hope for Rivers. But I'd say, it was pretty early. He didn't stand out in any way, good or bad, in spring practices.
Did any of the linebackers stand out? We're going to give Kiko a pass. He was awesome last year. He's coming off an injury. He's got surgery and things like that. He was still working his way into team activities during OTAs and minicamp. So what about the rest of the linebacker rotation? Anyone stand out, either good or bad?
Yeah, I think Preston Brown did a pretty nice job running with the second unit behind Brandon Spikes. I think he showed a little bit more athleticism than maybe he was given credit for coming out of Louisville. I think that was maybe the knock on him, was that he might not be a super athletic guy, but he looked pretty comfortable. And that the linebacker depth, and I think that you could say the same thing about the defensive line. I think there's jobs to be had there, maybe even more so at linebacker. And I think Preston Brown went a long way toward, not that he wasn't going to make the team as a third-round pick. His job was safe, but I think he went sort of a long way toward impressing and showing that, I think he's not that he's going to push Spikes, but that they've got a pretty quality player there that can be a reserve, and hopefully they can bring along and develop maybe into an eventual starter.
We're talking with Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News, who is at OTAs and minicamp for the Buffalo Bills and is giving us kind of the rundown of what's going on over there. You mentioned Manny Lawson in your last answer. What's kind of going on at the defensive end spot? Is Jerry Hughes getting the lion's share of defensive end snaps? Was Manny Lawson doing it, or was it even a guy like Jarris Wynn, opposite Mario Williams, of course?
Yeah, it was. You have to remember that Lawson was only there for minicamp, so he was only there for 3 practices. So Hughes was the starter, and really got a lot of playing time. Mario Williams, they're sort of easing in. So he would, when he was out there, of course, he was the starter, but there were a lot of times where Jarris Wynn was in that position, whether it be Mario taking a series off or even taking a day off of practice, and no injury concerns or worries there. That's just sort of the way that they've gone about it with Mario Williams and his workload. So really, the question that I have at defensive end, and it's one that they didn't address in the draft, is who is going to be sort of that third pass rusher. You know that you've got Mario Williams. You know that Jerry Hughes can rush the passer, but there's a pretty big opening on this team for somebody to step into that third pass rusher role. And, I think right now you would say that it's going to be Manny Lawson, but if you look at his career, that hasn't been a role that he's really excelled at. But given his, he's 240 pounds, so he's probably more suited for that than, a Jarris Wynn, who's closer to 270. I think Wynn, and my colleague Mark Gaughan wrote this at the end of minicamp, picked a good team to sign with. The depth at defensive end is behind Mario Williams. If there were an injury to Mario Williams, Jarris Wynn's going to get a lot of playing time. And so I think that he's going to fit solidly into this rotation against a team like the Jets, who are run heavy. Jarris Wynn's probably going to see a little bit more time than Manny Lawson would. And, the question is can Jerry Hughes stand up on first and second down and third down against the run? Or, because really last year he kind of became just a pass. I hate to say just a pass rusher, but
He did a really good job at it too.
Yeah, he was a darn good pass rusher, but that was his role, was to really rush the passer. And now, at least through spring practices, they've got him out there with the starting unit for first and second downs too, where that rushing the passer isn't always going to be the job. It's going to be stopping the run too. So it'll be interesting to see how Hughes does with that job. We'll talk about him a little bit more later, though, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be that defensive end position is wide open, and Wynn is a very interesting guy, as you said. He reminds me a lot of kind of that Alan Branch guy that's going to kind of be that second wave player that could really make a big impact, and because of his size, can kick down a defensive end if he has to, or sorry, defensive tackle, but also play the defensive end spot and really make a good contribution. Moving a little bit further backward. Corey Graham, he was my number one free agent target. I really loved the skill set he was going to bring to the Buffalo Bills because I'm personally worried, like a lot of folks, about Leotis McKelvin regressing under Jim Schwartz as opposed to having the blitzing Mike Pettin in front of him. And I thought that he was going to be a good safety net for that. And then he could play the nickel cornerback and he could play special teams and do everything the Bills had been looking for. And so when they signed him, I got really excited. What's going on with Corey Graham? And I'll throw Nickel Roby into that question as well. What's going on with the rotation at cornerback?
Yeah, Graham has been playing outside with Ron Brooks, and they got a lot of time in the spring because they were sort of easing Gilmore and McKelvin into practices and into reps, things like that, into series. So I think they got a really good look at Graham and at Ron Brooks on the outside just because of the time off for McKelvin and Gilmore. In that nickel role, Roby was there again making plays just the way he did last year. I know some people maybe saw like some tweets about it or whatever, but toward one of the mini camp practices toward the end, he had just a phenomenal interception at the end of a 2-minute drill against DJ Manuel. Looked like he could have jumped over the goalpost. He jumped so high to catch the ball and landed square on his back and was down for a couple of minutes. Just had the wind knocked out of him, but he's a tough guy. He got back up. And Jim Schwartz just talked about how impressed he had been with Roby too. So I think that you'll see him in that nickel role. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be in it. He hasn't done anything in spring to dissuade the Bills from using him there. And then Corey Graham, I think, has the flexibility to play a number of different spots for this team. There was talk when he was signed too about playing a sort of a safety role, and I think you could see that in nickel or dime packages. I think they love his versatility. And as you mentioned there, he's good depth on the outside. In Baltimore he played in the slot almost exclusively, but that's not to say that he started his career in Chicago as a cornerback playing on the boundary too. So I think he can play outside as well as inside and play a little bit of safety, be one of those core special teamers, as you said. I agreed with you. I thought that that was a good signing by the Bills, and he's on top of that, they're bringing a local kid home, which is kind of neat for the story. But more so than that, he's just a good, solid, all-around football player that can do a lot of things.
You mentioned the safety rotation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see Corey Graham's name at any of the safety positions during the spring practices. So who is getting the starters reps opposite of Aaron Williams?
Yeah, it was Denoris Skurski mostly. Duke Williams got a few, but I think when camp starts, you'll see when they're in their traditional defense, I think you'll see Aaron Williams and Denoris Skurski lined up as the safeties with Williams as the free safety and Skurski as the strong. Not that there's a huge differential between the two because Jim Schwartz said it. The guys need to know both. They need to be able to play up in the that center field role, and they need to be able to play up in the box as well. But I think Skurski is going to get the first crack, and it's interesting. He had a sort of a sneaky good year last year. If you look at his statistics, he made some plays when he got opportunities. I think he had 2.5 or 3.5 sacks. I believe he took either a fumble return or an interception back for a touchdown. So he had some big plays, and it'll be interesting to see if he can kind of continue that and be a playmaker for this team. He's going to be pushed definitely by Duke Williams, who's a second-year guy. But if I had to sort of pick a guy that I think might have the inside track, at least as of right now, it would be Skurski.
Yeah, Skurski had that fumble return touchdown against the Patriots. That's why
Right.
I cracked a smile when you said it, just because I remember the play so distinctly, like the running back's arm hitting the ground. I can't remember which one it was, but the ball just kind of hanging out there for a second, and then Skurski running through the open hole and taking it the other way for the touchdown. It was just a fun play to watch. We don't get a whole lot of those, so they kind of stick out. All right, so the defensive changes. People are worried that Schwartz isn't going to blitz. I mean, I know he's not Dave Wanstead or anything like that, but with all the defensive changes that are going on, what's kind of stuck out the most to you as you watch the practices?
I guess the thing that stuck out the most is that they are blitzing a good deal, and they're sending Roby, and they're sending some of the linebackers. I didn't see Kiko blitz too much, but they sent guys. And a lot of times that pressure came from the edge. Whether it was, as I mentioned, their Roby, the inside cornerback blitzing, or maybe they'll send in a safety. So I think it was important what you said there, that he's not Wanstead. I don't know necessarily that they're going to give as many looks as a Pettin defense does, but very few do. Only the Rex Ryan and the Rob Ryan defenses do. But I do think that you're going to see, and it's also important to remember too that just because the Bills threatened a lot of blitzes last year doesn't mean they actually sent them. If you define a blitz as sending 5 or more pass rushers, the Bills didn't blitz an extraordinary amount of times last year. They maybe showed it a lot more than what they actually brought, and maybe one of the 4 pass rushers on a play that isn't a blitz is Nickel Roby. A lot of people might look at that and say, oh, well, that's a blitz. They sent Nickel Roby. Well, not necessarily if, say, Mario Williams drops back or something like that. Not that you'd want to not have Mario Williams rush the passer too often, but you know what I mean. So I think that you'll see. What's that?
Ted Williams dropping back into coverage on the zone blitz.
Yeah, right. It's you don't pay him $100 million to cover. So
right.
I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised about Schwartz's defense in the sense that it's not going to be, everybody. The word that always was used for Wanstead was vanilla. I don't think that you're going to see that from Schwartz. I had a chance to talk with him at the end of minicamp for 10 or 15 minutes. For a feature story that I'm writing prior to training camp, and it was really kind of interesting. And he really opened up about the fact that he's not going to try to make a bunch of square pegs fit into round holes. He's going to take what this team did well last year, and that was rush the passer, of course, because what did they finish? Second in the league in sacks, and he's going to try to work with that. And I think a lot of people, when they read this story, are going to like what they hear from Schwartz, and I liked what I heard from him. He, he's an interesting guy. He goes back to the Bill Belichick coaching tree. He got a start in Cleveland actually with Belichick, so he's been around a long time, and he knows defense. And I think if you look at the premium that the Bills put on going out to get him after they realized that Mike Pettin was leaving, I think it was for a reason, and I give Doug Marrone credit for that, for having a plan if Pettin were to leave and executing it as quickly as they did with Schwartz.
So, as we asked with the offense, who was the defensive MVP? Who was like the top dude?
Jerry Hughes, easy. I mean, he was borderline unblockable, and he was just flying around the edge. And I guess, that's the classic conundrum of spring practices and training camp. Is that good for the defense, and is it good for Jerry Hughes, or is it bad for Eric Pierce, who's kind of getting beat time and time again? But Hughes was just a monster off the edge, and really, just as I said, it just was unblockable at times. And I think I think the season that he had last year is going to go a long way toward. I think he just took a lot of confidence from it, and it would have been easy for him to really wonder where his career was when the Colts traded him to the Bills, because he was a first-round pick, and the bust word was thrown around a lot with him. And he went out and proved last year that he can play in this league, and I think he's going to take a lot of confidence from that. And you could kind of see that in spring. He was really really, really impressive. The same way that I felt about Robert Woods in terms of how impressive they were, I felt the same way about Hughes.
Great. Is there anything else you want to mention about camp? I've got some general Buffalo news questions and some stadium questions and stuff like that from some of our readers. But is there anything else you want to say about the spring practices, OTAs, someone we didn't touch on, or things like that?
You're putting me on the spot here. Well, we didn't talk about tight end. There's been a lot of talk about Moiaki and how he fits, and I would say that I wasn't blown away. He doesn't look super athletic. He's not gonna come in and be a blocker. I mean, they've already got Lee Smith, who's a pretty good one of those. So I'm not real convinced that Moiaki's got a roster spot assured here. I think
I am writing that down.
Yes, right. Yeah, hold it to me. You
Tweeting
can't hold it to me
right now. No.
in the end of June, but tight end was a position, again, another position that they didn't address outside of re-signing Scott Chandler. So I guess in a way they did address it, but they decided that they were good enough with what they had, if you count Scott Chandler among that. And I think it'll be interesting to see. I think you know what you're getting in Chandler, you know what you're getting in Lee Smith, and then Moiaki or Chris Gregg, can one of those two impress enough to not only earn a roster spot, but then to somehow be factored into the offense in some way in terms of maybe using two tight end sets, which I like the idea of in theory. It's just a matter of are they good enough to do it? Can they block well enough to sort of show people or to not tell opposing defenses, well, hey, we're using two tight ends, we're going to throw the ball here. So that type of thing. So, Moiaki, I think, is a guy, because he's got a little bit of name recognition, that people are interested in, but I would sort of temper my enthusiasm a little bit about him.
I just tweeted it. I hope you got a little notification on your phone or something like that.
I heard it buzz, but I didn't see it.
That's good. Okay, so we do have a couple just kind of general questions going through, and I'm glad you touched on the tight ends because with Scott Chandler's absence, Moiaki did get a lot of playing time, and so I'm glad that you brought that back up. Where is that one? Dan Lavoie, wants to know your first impression of Chantrell Henderson. That was a quick one I wanted to get to.
I don't know if he means as a player or as a guy. I mean, I don't know
which one we're worried about more either. So yeah.
Probably, I guess he would probably mean as a player. I was somewhat surprised that when Cordy Glenn, was out at the end of minicamp, he was sick and missed one day and basically kind of sat out the other 2 days. Chantrell was the guy that they put in at first team left tackle, which I thought was somewhat significant. There are other tackles on this roster who have been here longer. What was that an opportunity for him, or to sort of show the coaching staff what he had, or was that based on what they saw in spring practices and rookie minicamp that they liked? I'm not exactly sure. I didn't get a chance to ask Doug Marrone about it, but that was somewhat significant to me. I wouldn't say that he set the world on fire when he did have the opportunity. He was beat a couple of times by Hughes. No crime in that, though, because Hughes was beating everybody. As a guy, I mean, I don't know if he really cares about it as a guy, but he's a really polite kid, exceedingly polite. Ends every answer every question that you ask him with "sir," and you wonder if he's got a little bit of Marcel Dareus in him, and that he's not a vindictive or bad person by any means, but maybe just made some poor decisions. So, given where he was picked in the draft, there's not a lot of risk that comes along with a 7th round pick. If he pans out, that's great. We talked earlier about the third tackle job and how up for grabs I think it is. So it's a pretty good opportunity for him here too.
Right. Kent Dickerson wants to know, and I've already answered this question in the comments section from my perspective. On Twitter, he seems a bit confrontational, but is Tim Graham a nice guy?
Yes, he's absolutely a nice. That's really funny. He's absolutely a nice guy. Tim is on top of being a nice guy, he's as talented of a journalist as I've ever met. And the Buffalo News is absolutely lucky to have him. And I look up to Tim as a mentor. Way before I started at the Buffalo News, I would email with Tim, and he was working at the News at the time before he went to ESPN. And he always took the time to email back and offer constructive criticism if that's what I was looking for, or a kind word. So, and he's done that for a number of young journalists, not just myself. And so I'll always appreciate that from Tim. And like I said, I greatly enjoy working with him. And after work, I greatly enjoy having a beverage or two with him too.
That sounds good. Another one from Kent is, what would you tell readers who struggle with having to now pay to read content that was once free? I'm assuming he means the paywall at buffalonews.com.
Wow, that's a tough question.
Heavy question.
Yeah, it is a heavy question. Well, I would say that there's a lot of talented people that work at the Buffalo News whose livelihood depends on, at the end of the day, selling newspapers, and that's what we've always been about. And before the internet came around, people didn't have any problem, paying for the newspaper. And yes, it's delivered in a different medium now. There's not the print. If you choose to read it on your iPad or your iPhone every day, you're not having it delivered to you. But there is still a business aspect of this for not just the Buffalo News, but every newspaper in the country. At the end of the day, newspapers have to make money. It's still a business, and a paywall is one way that papers all around the country have gone to in an effort to raise revenue, which at the end of the day we have to do. Is it perfect? No. And probably the mistake that newspapers made, I could go on for hours about this, is that, so just jump in anytime to stop me, but probably the mistake that newspapers made was that it was free to start. I think
they waited too long.
Right. Had it never been free, maybe the conversation wouldn't be had. But I'd also say that I think that there's probably the more internet savvy people out there would probably have figured out a way that if they were bound and determined to read the paper without paying, they've probably figured out a way to do it at this point.
We don't talk about that stuff on our website. We like to uphold copyright law on our website, both with the NFL's rules and with your guys' rules. Moving to the stadium, this is kind of a sarcastic question, and if you knew Sergeant Major Thor, the commenter that's asking it, that's pretty much his MO. But do you see season ticket holder sales going way up since the stadium has a fresh coat of paint?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't see them going way up, but they are up. I said when they did their last stadium renovation tour maybe a month ago that their season tickets are at the highest that they've been since 2010. I applaud a lot of what they're doing in terms of trying to make the stadium more accessible for people to get in and to have a better experience when they are in there, in terms of widening the concourses and cosmetic things like renovating the bathrooms, which I know can be some sort of a disaster area during the games from what I hear. So I think that those things are only going to help. And one of the things they said about the stadium renovations was that it was geared toward making the experiences better for every fan. And the difference between that and adding more luxury boxes is that a lot of people that go to these games are never going to see the luxury boxes. So I think it is a good thing that they've made an effort to make the game day experience more enjoyable for fans. And the fact that they're paying $130 million to renovate a stadium that may be obsolete pretty soon is sort of just as good of a sign as any, is that the NFL is king, and it's just the NFL can really kind of get whatever it wants. But that being said, I think people will be pleasantly surprised when they show up at the end of August and in September to the stadium. I think they're going to like a lot of what's been done there.
Right, and I don't think, if you look at it on the whole, 10 years for $100 million isn't really the end of the world, especially when you think about some of the upgrades that were desperately needed. I think immediately of the Wi-Fi that was, it wasn't even god-awful. You couldn't even get cell phone reception in there. And so if they can improve just that, I'll pay an extra few bucks in my taxes for that. But widening the concourses, widening the footprint of the stadium. I think some of that stuff that people really are going to walk in and be like, wow, this is way nicer. There's not going to be a ton of that, but the stuff that is there that people are going to be able to see is going to be, I think, make a big difference. I don't know what the bathroom upgrades are going to look like, but you never went to a game before you were working for the Niagara Gazette?
Oh no, yeah. I
okay.
I definitely.
You know what the bathrooms are like?
Yeah. Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you talked about it like it was like some far off concept. I know it's been a while, but
yeah.
Oh, which reminds me, what do you think about them moving the press box to the end of the stadium?
Well, selfishly, I hate it. Of course. I mean, it's you can't expect me to say that I like it. I mean, I understand it, but it's a bummer because we probably had the best press box in terms of visually of any stadium that I had been into, and now we're losing that. I was on the 50-yard line. My left leg was in the Bills' territory, and my right leg was in their opponent's territory because the seats we had in the press box were just that good right on the 50-yard line. But hey, what are you going to do? I mean, they're trying to make money, and,
it's a business.
That's what's going to happen. So hopefully the press box, it was a little cramped, if I'm going to be a little bit of a whiner. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more room in the new one.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty big suite that they were turning into the press box. I don't know how the construction is going to play out in that regard. So we've been chatting with Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News. He's given us his opinions on minicamp and OTAs and roster battles and all this other stuff as we head into training camp less than a month away now. Are you excited to head out to St. John Fisher? Do you go out there and stay out there? I mean, you got a little baby at home. Are you going to be driving back and forth between Buffalo and Rochester a lot?
Yeah, I usually drive back and forth. The only time that I'll stay is actually there's a dorm room that the media can use at St. John Fisher that we have a room in. But I will only usually stay if it's a night practice followed by a morning practice or a morning walkthrough. If they have those, then I usually stay. But if not, then I'll drive back. So yeah, we pile up the mileage in early August.
Well, and it's, of course, extended for two big reasons. Not only the fifth preseason game you mentioned, the Hall of Fame game being really early, but with those stadium renovations, they pushed training camp even further back at the end because some of the stuff's not going to be ready at Ralph Wilson Stadium. So if you get an extra long training camp, I know you're psyched.
Yeah, we're going to be I'm going to get to know Rochester really well this summer coming up. And actually, one of the other things that I cover for the paper is golf, and the LPGA tournament is going to be going on during camp too, so it's going to be a busy time out in Rochester this summer.
Yeah, there you go. Well, yeah, okay, it's going to be fun.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to getting up there at least once or twice. I used to live right around the corner from there, but I have since moved to Genesee County to be closer to my family. So, anyway, long story short, thank you for joining us tonight, Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News. If you want to get in touch with him, you can tweet at him at Jay Skurski. And I'll put some tweets up on @Buff Rumblings to find some of Jay's work. So thanks again, and go Bills.